everybody, Steve Tuig, lead guide and owner of Mastering Change. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever done something that at the end you thought was terrible and you couldn't imagine you'd ever said it? Have you ever wondered how some people just seem to set you off and rub you the wrong way and you don't know why? Have you ever noticed how sometimes we get caught in these arguments that's like watching a train wreck happen in slow motion and we can't seem to get out of it? Well, many times we can trace this back to a very specific part of ourselves that we hide, repress, and deny, that ever-present and extremely elusive human shadow. Now, the shadow was a concept that was first developed in the early 1900s in Europe by a gentleman by the name of Carl Jung. He was a noted psychiatrist and researcher, and he was developing the archetypes of personality into a series of books on mind and human potential. These now form a key base of modern Jungian psychology and have had dramatic impact on our global understanding of the human psyche. This was a rich period of time for psychology and human development as a field. I mean, think about it. Sigmund Freud was alive and practicing. This was pre-World War II period, and there's these intellectual debates that were burning with a particular intensity like a fire throughout the European continent. And Jung was in correspondence with Freud for several years and traveled broadly as a speaker, as a researcher. I mean, he went to Europe, US, Africa, India. He was all over the place, right? Thus, when you go and you look at the shadow, you're going to see how Jung actually built on Freud's concepts of the ego and the id, as well as other dominant personalities theories of his time. However, Jung was a little different. He didn't confine himself to the world of pure theory and research. He was an actual practicing psychiatrist for most of his life. He was treating private patients in his office, and he was working with institutions and individuals with severe psychiatric conditions. He actually had firsthand knowledge of schizophrenic episodes, depression, hallucinations, and neuroses and delusions from his very own family history to pull from. As a result, when Jung finally shared his concept of the shadow with the world, it was in a form that carried practical and understandable elements for personal progression and human transformation. Now, the shadow, what you need to understand, is part of your unconscious mind. It represents some very interesting concepts like repressed ideas, unacknowledged beliefs, denied elements of yourself, weaknesses and shortcomings, things you don't want to own, desires, instincts that have been repressed. As a whole, this archetype represents the wildness, the chaos, the unknown elements within you that haven't been cracked open. For some people, this means the dark side of themselves. But for others, it's simply an opportunity. It's the less controlled or societal conditioned part of themselves. And each of us faces one of two choices when it comes to our shadow. You can deny this part of you exists and continue to live and fight and refuse it, or you can accept it and use it to grow and integrate and transform. The shadow is a moral problem. It challenges everybody because nobody can become conscious of the shadow without a considerable amount of effort. You've got to be committed. To become conscious of it, you've got to recognize those darker aspects of your personality as real, as present, like this is who I am. And this act is essential for any kind of self-knowledge. It's the cave that you fear that unlocks your deepest powers. Now, before we address the need to choose how to manage your personal shadow, it's worthwhile to dig into the evolutionary roots of the shadow. Where does the shadow within us come from? Why do we have this piece of ourselves? Well, see, your shadow is something you were always born with. It's like a filing cabinet. Though not every element of your shadow was with you from birth. Through a series of indoctrinations, initiations, we add pieces of ourselves to the shadow over time. These indoctrinations come from family, friends, our culture, and other environmental stimulation. We've all had a side of ourselves that we present to a world, our identity, our presenting identity. This side is called the persona. The world persona itself is taken from the Latin word mask. Persona behaviors and thought patterns reflected what you believe and what you've been taught by the world, especially cultural beliefs and the manners and the behavioral scripts from your actual life situations, things that have happened. This becomes your conscious mask to put on over the internal struggle of the deeper version of you. And it's often so real that you consider it yourself through the actual self throughout your life. So on one level, consider the shadow a filing folder for certain parts of yourself that have been with you since your first days on earth. A part of it is pre-stocked with knowledge and impulses that have been passed down through your genes as part of the collective unconscious shared by all mankind. I mean, think of it. We were tribal for 90% of our existence as humans. The other contents of the folder, though, they've been developed over the course of your lifetime. Both of these elements make a continual impact on your psyche, on your mindset. Consider repressed ideas. At one moment in time, they were just ideas. However, something or someone told you that these ideas were bad, that they weren't acceptable, that you couldn't do that here. That's not what a person does. So they couldn't have a spot in your persona since that's not part of the public face to the world. So those ideas became repressed, shoved down, shuffled away, hidden in the filing cabinet of the shadow. The same goes for unacknowledged beliefs. Maybe deep down you really hate a separate target group, black, white, gay, straight, rich, poor, old, young, and you utterly despise them. Yet you may not acknowledge that on the surface or the persona level, even though that you find that for some reason you're rude to anyone you meet from that target group. And if you were able to say out loud that you hated those people, it might change your behavior. But since you have that belief inside you as unacknowledged, locked away in the shadow, it remains in your shadow, impacting your behavior without you consciously even knowing it. Now, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with target groups, different tribes. But we have these irrational beliefs that there's something wrong with these different tribes based upon the color of their skin, their choice, their age. This is just an example. These are just examples of how some shadow-based belief that people live with. Most don't do the work necessary to find out where they've picked up that belief system. They become denied elements. And these fall into the same category. Perhaps once you acknowledge them, but now you choose to believe that these things aren't true about yourself. You know, maybe you weigh 400 pounds, maybe you're overweight, unhealthy, and you deny that you've got problems with emotional eating. You don't dig underneath the surface to see what's causing it. Maybe you spend money frivolously. You're not able to save, but you just insist that you're unlucky with money. And the truth is, this way eludes you and your persona mask over the real state of being, which is left over time to find a new home in the shadow. Maybe weaknesses or perceived shortcomings also arrive there, right? They show up in the home of your shadow. Perhaps you're not good with math. It's something that you struggle with unconsciously. You avoid numbers, arithmetic, balancing your checkbook, investing financially. But when you were first born, you had no concept of basic math, much less calculus and geometry. Yet that element of perceived inability has built up in your shadow over time, so that now when you see someone being successful in that area, you feel inferior without being able to pinpoint it. And then because you can't own that inferiority, you project onto them that they're a monster. How about your desires or instinct? Does your society not teach you that that some things are right to want and some things are wrong to desire? I mean, our instincts to eat and interact socially to help others are honored as good, like to be of service to others. But our instincts to conquer, to rule, to kill, those aren't welcomed in the modern culture. That differentiation between instincts and desires wasn't with you when you were born, and even when you were young, maybe. Some of those instincts were yours from the collective unconscious, the desire to eat, to hunt, to rule. And they maybe tried to express themselves openly, yet somewhere along the line, the shadow starts to get filled up with these other desires, these other instincts that society has taught you were taboo, unmentionable, or wrong. The net result is that throughout your life, the shadow can become a very big part of your psyche due to all the information and impulses that it begins to hold. But since it's not openly acknowledged or explored, this shadow lives in the unconscious. It can become a hidden weight that holds you down, drags you down, sucks the life out of you. your conscious mind continually battles to maintain this is who I am, our identity. The shadow then gets kept back, kept down by the unconscious, by the conscious. But it can be energy intensive battle depending on the changes and challenges presenting in your life. I mean, just look at COVID and all the political unrest and all the shadow that's brought up. The sensation of being stuck, being held back, or being detached from your true self might just simply be a signal from your inner layers that the shadow needs some attention. It's time to do some work in this area. You may also seem to find yourself cracking around the edges. Maybe you're losing control of your sense need to be in control. It's maybe another sign. It's time to do some shadow work. Challenging the status quo and current self-construct is important. The time is now. The place is here. There is no better time than now to start the process of peeling back the layers of your psyche. Remember, our destiny is shaped by our decisions. But what shapes those decisions? Many times, most of the decisions that people make are unconscious. It's time to start to dig underneath the surface. It's time to find out what's really underneath there, because that's where the real personal power comes from. That's where your real transformation is going to begin.